Hello, everyone. I'm Anya Prusa, the Slater Family Fellow here at the Wilson Center and a Senior Associate at our Brazil Institute. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to this event, Closing the Gender Gap, Empowering Women's Economic Participation, as we celebrate Women's History Month here in the United States and coming just one day after International Women's Day. The purpose of these holidays is to commemorate the cultural, political, and socioeconomic achievements of women. But they also serve as a focal point, reminding us of the inequalities that remain and driving us to act. Economic empowerment is an area where there are both incredible success stories and profound gender disparities when it comes to poverty, discrimination, and exploitation. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated these challenges, disproportionately impacting women who bear the brunt of childcare responsibilities and who are also more likely to work in frontline jobs and in the informal economy. So what does economic empowerment actually look like? It means having the power to make decisions about one's financial future. It means having meaningful access to the economy in terms of generating income, but also in terms of deciding how that income is spent, as well as access to financial services and avenues for entrepreneurship and professional growth. And we know from countless studies that when women are empowered to contribute economically, their families, their communities, and their countries all benefit. These are just some of the issues that our speakers will be addressing today in a two-part event. First, an interview with the president and CEO of Softec, Blanca Trevino, and second, a moderated panel discussion with three incredible experts on women's economic empowerment. It is now my pleasure to turn this over to my talented colleague, Olivia Soledad, Program Assistant at the Mexico Institute.
Thank you, Anya, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Andrew, Director of the Mexico Institute, and I are very pleased to host and moderate this discussion with our special guest, President and CEO of Softec, Blanca Trevino. Blanca is originally from Monterrey, where she earned her degree in computer science. She co-founded Softec in 1982 and has been leading it as president and CEO since the year 2000. In her role, she helps organizations all over the globe evolve through digital technology, and under her leadership, Softec has become the leading information technology services company in Latin America. Softec employs thousands of people worldwide and has over 30 offices all over the globe. Blanca has had numerous accomplishments in her career, as we've already heard. She's the first woman who was appointed to the Mexican Council of Business, which prior to her induction was actually called the Mexican Council for Men in Business, already an accomplishment in itself. She is also a board member of Walmart Mexico and various other associations, such as the Mexican Stock Exchange, the America Society and Council of the Americas, MIT School of Engineering, and many more. Blanca was also inducted to the Women in Technology Hall of Fame just in 2019. She's frequently regarded as one of the most powerful women in Mexico and one of the most influential executives in Latin America. So Blanca, thank you so much again for joining us this morning. We're very pleased to have you with us.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure for me. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here.
Awesome. So as Anya mentioned in her introduction, we're gathering here just one day after International Women's Day, a day in which we not only commemorate women and their various achievements across sectors, but also a day in which we can raise awareness about the very real challenges and barriers that women continue to face all over the globe. So Blanca, I would love to kick off this conversation by asking you what International Women's Day means to you beyond that specific day, and how does the economic empowerment of women fit into that importance?
First, let me tell you that this is an unfair question after Anya's introduction, because I cannot agree more with her, because she already covered most of the things that I could mention about why we celebrate this. So this is unfair. You never told me that this was going to happen, but at the same time, it's easy, because I'll start by saying that I couldn't agree more. And I think she covered most of the reasons or why we're celebrating this, because at the end, celebration, it's that. You want to see and look at the achievements that you have. And I mean, at the end of a celebration is that. It's celebrating the achievements. And I truly believe that women we have in the past, whatever number of years, you can go back to when we got the voting rights 100 years ago, all the way today to have in the US a woman vice president. So their celebration, it's important. It is very important. But also it's an opportunity to give that visibility or to create the awareness that you mentioned, because even though we do have incredible achievements, we still face challenges all over the world, and challenges that we share and some others that are probably different from one another. You mentioned that we do have offices in countries like Brazil or Mexico or the US, but also in India and in China. And it always amazed me that there are common challenges. Even though different cultures, we still face similar challenges. Certainly also some others in some countries, Middle East probably, it's one in which they are probably the last ones. I think one friend mentioned that, and you're going to hear that in the panel. But similar challenges. No, and that means that in a certain way, we all enjoy achievements in different regions. Even though I'm from India, probably I'm not. I'm from Mexico. We can celebrate that vice president from the U.S. because we feel that as an achievement, no matter in which region. So celebration, it's celebrate because we have come such a long way, but also it's also an opportunity to create that awareness, because we have to make sure that everybody understands that we're still facing challenges, and there are not going to be any easy challenges, but we can enjoy and celebrate that there's millions and millions of women making sure that we got the rights that we deserve. And sometimes it's not the right, but the opportunities that we deserve. And much more encouraging is that we see also men celebrating the Women's International Day. So it means a lot to me. It's different reasons, and Anya didn't make this easy for me. I don't have to mention all those reasons or achievements.
Well, I'd like to dive in with you specifically a little bit more about the challenges in the technology sector, as you're the expert in that field. And it's worldwide one of the sectors where women are still underrepresented. And in Latin America, women represent about 1 in 10 tech workers. And in Mexico, only about 15% of people working in new technologies are women. Women frequently are less inclined to enter into the STEM field, and surveys in Mexico have even shown that about 1/3 of Mexicans believes that men are better suited for STEM-related jobs than men. So how, through your career and through your experiences, what knowledge can you give us about how we can best confront this problem and encourage women to enter the tech industry? And as we know, especially now in our new reality, technology is all the more important, and we have to make sure that everybody, women and men, have similar access to these technologies to be able to thrive economically. So can you tell us a little bit about how you think we can approach these problems?
Yeah, and probably I'll start with a disclaimer. Let me say that I have been very blessed, privileged, because I cannot think about an obstacle that I face, or probably it was, and every time that I go back or I participate in panels, when I said this, I have been privileged and have been very fortunate. I don't see any, I cannot remember any event in which I felt that kind of discrimination or that situation. So let me make that disclaimer, because I have to also agree that probably it was a decision that I made. I think years ago I said gender should not be an issue for me. And when you take that decision, you don't see those obstacles. You see ways of getting whatever you want to do. So let me start by saying, regardless of my profession or tech or whatever, I will always say that there is a decision that you make, and you should not allow anyone to make decisions for you. But I cannot deny what you just mentioned. In this very small representation of women in this field, like in any other field, think about mining or energy, horrible, right? But in tech, it is very frustrating, because I truly believe that talent has no gender, no nationality, and we are in such a need of talent that if you as a company, as a community, whatever, take whatever, you do not want to have access to that talent, you're missing 50% of that. So sometimes I believe you mentioned that in many cases, someone might think that we're not well suited to play a role there. But we have to go back to universities. We have to go back to the decision that girl took about saying, no, I might not be well suited. I mean, it's a decision. It starts there. It's not with a company or someone else saying you cannot get this job, because that misrepresentation, it is also related to that. But probably you don't have those numbers. They're public. But if you go to universities, even though we're a small percentage, but we have many more, probably 35, 40% of women getting into those fields. But then they go back to saying, but that would be difficult for me. I'm going to share something that, again, I'm very fortunate. When I decided many years ago, probably more than 40 years ago, when I was looking at the fields in which I could go in university, I decided to go in what they call at that time computing. And I went back home and I told my dad, and I said, I'm getting to this. Think about more than 40 years ago, telling that to your dad. He couldn't understand there were not laptops or things like that, or personal computers. So he couldn't understand. It was like saying, I'm gonna go to the moon and back. And he was so excited without even understanding what was that. But I have to be very honest. And the next day I said, I might not be, probably it's not the right decision. It might be very difficult for me. So I went back to the university and I changed my application and said, no, I'm going to go into marketing. But by that time, my dad loved to brag about whatever I was doing. He really enjoyed that. So it probably was not the next day, but 2 or 3 days later. So I changed my application. I went back home, and my dad was with his brother, and he was again bragging about his daughter getting into computing. And after his brother left, I said, Dad, I am so sorry, but at the very last moment, I decided that I might not be, no, I decided to get into marketing. And my dad looked at me and said, what? Marketing? What are you doing that? And he questioned me, or he challenged me and said, tell me the reason why you made that decision. And I used the worst word, or probably the right one, because he challenged me. And I said, I don't know, I'm scared. I'm afraid that I might not be capable of doing that. And he looked at me and said, you know what? I can live with a daughter that is not smart, that probably is not pretty. You're smart, I'm pretty. Well, that's what he said. But I would certainly not tolerate in my house someone that is a coward, that is scared, that is afraid. So if those are the reasons, you better go back and tell them that you made a mistake and you're going to get into computer science. And I like to share this because if my dad hadn't challenged me, I wouldn't be there. I was the first one to say, I'm not capable, I'm not suited. So it was my responsibility, it was my decision. And it took my dad to challenge me and to say, I will not allow this. It probably just me saying, you will not live with me if you don't go back. But it's, I think we have to give visibility, and you mentioned this, Olivia, if we have this kind of misrepresentation, it's difficult for girls to relate, to say, yes, there is a chance for me. And there are different role models there that were able to do it. But I think we have to give that kind of visibility and question if it's something related to them. I truly believe it is. It's the first decision to probably limit themselves, it was on their side. And in many cases, they think that it's going to be even more difficult, more demanding, and it is not true. Probably it's the profession in which you as a woman can do better, because you can do this work from whatever you are. And again, talent has no gender. So companies should be very open to attract the most talented people. And in many cases, they're a woman, very talented woman. So it's, I think it's perception, sometimes related to the woman that is making that decision. And yes, probably I cannot deny that there's also this bias in many companies, in many groups, men that will take the decision for you. And they will not offer a certain position because you're getting married. So I don't want to get you into that problem. So it's always that. I don't think they question your talent. They question if you are going to be able to make whatever is needed in order to succeed. And they take the decision from you. They don't offer that position because they said, you're going to get married and you might be pregnant and you're not going to be able to do this. They think they're giving you a favor. They think that they're taking that struggle from you, and that is absolutely unfair and not true, right?
Well, Blanca, I think you bring up a lot of points that I think are very important, one of which is education. And I'm actually really glad that you brought that up. The Mexico Institute just yesterday posted an infographic that showed how the gender gap, at least in Mexico, in college education has been closing. So we're now reaching hopefully a point where men and women are enrolling in college at the same levels, which is not something that we saw 30 years ago. So that's definitely important. And I agree that I think it's a lot of it is probably due to a larger cultural views that still make some people feel like they can't reach certain goals, and some people sadly still promote those sorts of feelings. And one of the things that I know has really been impacting women in disproportionate ways is another point that you mentioned, which is the obligations of dealing with family. I saw a survey that Reforma and IMCO just posted over the weekend that said that 51% of women currently who are not working say that they don't, due to having to care for their children or their house, whereas only 2% of men who don't work use that as a reason for why they're not working. So I still believe that women disproportionately feel the weight of having to choose between family and work compared to their male counterparts. And I know you yourself have had to balance all of these various responsibilities while being CEO, head of your own family. So what advice would you give to these women, and what can workplaces do to help women alleviate this burden and help them feel empowered and supported enough to do both?
Again, I cannot question that there are women, and you mentioned Mexico, so let me focus on Mexico, but it can apply even to Latin America or even some other countries. I cannot deny that probably if you live in Mexico City, it's so difficult I mean, just the traffic, if you're going to take your kids to the daycare center and then they have to, again, drive or even sometimes not drive, but take a bus or whatever. I cannot deny that those challenges are there. But I like to think, and I keep pushing my daughters, my team, in every different topic, that it takes you the same time to focus on the obstacles that you can face, or look at the advantages or strengths that you can leverage, right? Takes you the same time. You decide what do you want to focus on that. You can focus on the strengths. And in Mexico, the family support system that you can have, family support amazingly. They really want you to succeed. And let's leverage on that. Do we have the daycare systems that the US has? Probably not. Do we have to take the bus or drive 30 minutes from work? Yes, but let's look at this part. Again, I'm talented, I'm committed, I'm self-determined, and I have my family to support me. And so from my perspective, in many cases, it is related to again, and probably you'll not like my answer, people that join the audience, because they'll say, oh, it's easy for you to say that when you have whatever position. But no, when I started, I didn't have that. I learned to call my brothers and said, yes, you have to go and pick my daughters at the piñata. In Mexico, piñatas is like parties for kids. And so you can focus on the advantages or the probably very few strengths that you might have, but you have them. Or you can keep on saying, no, I cannot do it. I cannot balance this. More and more companies do have policies for in a way facilitating this possibility, because more and more they do understand, and Anya mentioned this, all the benefits that they get as companies. It is good business when you attract the most talented people, and again, it's not gender related. So we'll see that. What we have to make sure is that show them that we do have that talent and that we are able to add value. But when you look at your family, something that for me worked, it's women feel guilty. Sometimes they feel guilty to have that kind of aspiration. So one thing is the company. I think more and more companies are working that and facilitating that. But then you go back to your environment, to the social environment, and women start by feeling guilty. But my girl is 2 years old. What am I gonna do? Am I gonna leave her with a daycare system? So one thing that is important that once you understand that those strengths and when you leverage those strengths, and if you're gonna use your family support system or whatever, you should never feel guilty about that. You have to have very clear priorities. My priorities are my daughters and my grandkids now, because I do have 3 grandkids. But I never felt guilty because I understood that feeling guilty, it's probably raising your kids feeling like victims of you. And you don't want to have kids that feel grow as victims. They will not succeed in life if they grow feeling that way. So one challenge probably it's that, it's to understand that you don't have to feel guilty or probably feel or depressed because you didn't have the chance for whatever reason. There's going to be a time in which you can do that, or feel ashamed if you didn't take the decision to really go after those aspirations, those dreams. I agree that there are many different situations, but I will always say that there are decisions that involve you and that you can take them. And one thing that I have to say, whenever you take that decisions to balance your life or to go after 2 things, you make sure that you enjoy both. Make sure that you have clear priorities about the things that you want to do, the things that you want to do. Make sure of that, because you don't want to raise your kids feeling victims of you. And you also don't want to give your team or whatever in the company to show them that you feel guilty, because then you not give your own, all that you have to give, all that you have to offer. Once you make the decision, enjoy it. Go after it and make sure that you add value in both ways. And you also understand when you're needed to go to a very important meeting and when you can be very open and say, I cannot be in this meeting. I'm not necessarily very strategic here, but it's so important for my daughter that I will be in the dance festival. So you have to show them that you do understand where you play where you are needed, where you really make a difference. But you can balance, you can reach that balance. Believe me, if there is a panel about kids, and my daughters will agree with me, they feel that they have the best childhood that they could have. And I was the only mother, I mean, her friends, mother's friends, none of them worked. So that it was so easy for them to say, oh, you're not coming with me for whatever, another piñata, another party. But I was there whenever I was needed, and I really enjoy it. And I have been even how do you call a room mother or whatever, when you're in the school and they ask you, because I wanted my daughters to say my mother is a normal mother. So I was there. You know what? Something that was different as a child is social environment. Sometimes they will say, because none of the mothers used to work, they'll look at me or look at my daughters and, oh, but she works and she might not be here for them. And but at the end, they had to agree with me that I was the room mother and they were not. That I was in the dance festival and they were playing canasta. So at the beginning, the pressure was there. The pressure was more social, not family, but social, because I'm from Monterrey. I'm from Mexico, it's the north. And if you are going to look for machistas, this is the place to come. This is the place. So I don't know. I gave you a completely different answer because again, it's a decision that you make. Be sure that if you want to be into the tech industry, this is the best place to be, because and you mentioned this, during this pandemic, it was very obvious that technology is key, strategic. So we need even more time than before. And come, make an application. We'll give you, we have work for you, we have a job for you. And the same answer, you get the same answer from different companies. We cannot limit the pool talent that we have, and when are there. And you mentioned the universities and how it's getting balanced. But something that is interesting, and Andrew, don't get me wrong, but we get better rates. I'm sure you noticed that. Sometimes it's not necessarily always, but we do get the highest grades sometimes in universities. So the talent is there, and we should take advantage of that.
Blanca, these are great comments and suggestions, and many thoughts go through my mind, and I'm sure the panelists and the audience as well. Lots of different questions to ask, and you've raised some points that I know my wife, who went back to work as well, dealt with that sort of challenge of maybe the sense of disdain from work moms who stay at home toward working moms, but if I could, let me ask you a little bit about mentoring. And you observe that because of had you not had support from your dad, you might have gone in a different direction, or had he not challenged you to stick with computing. What are your thoughts, or what advice might you have for people, senior managers and corporate leaders such as yourself in terms of mentoring younger employees, frankly, whether they're male or female?
I think mentoring is important when you understand that it's both ways. I'm sure that at least I can say that I'm still a mentee in many cases, and you never expect who's going to mentor you, but you have to be always open to receive that kind of information, to share the experience and the challenges that and very openly, be very honest about that, and what was difficult and what was not. I might agree that whatever, VPs, your manager, your whatever, can be also your mentor. Amen. But I think it's even more important to have that visibility, that you can relate to women that have been able to balance and succeed. What you need from men, from my perspective, it's you need sponsors. You need people that truly believe in you and that challenge you. From my perspective, it's different sponsor than mentor. And mentor is important because they will probably lead your way and say, take a look at this, don't forget what, and whatever. Sponsor, it's someone that wants to take, I wouldn't say a risk, but they see it as a risk. They wanna really bet on you. They will say, I'm gonna be with you and for you, and I will not allow you to back up. I think sponsorship is even more important than mentorship. And mentors, for me, it's more when you have coffee with your other women executives in the company, and they said, you know what, my daughter asked me this, or my husband questioned that, or because you can, in a certain way, support each other and say, you shouldn't allow this. And you always have the choice to walk away from that and move to another company if you feel that you're not respected here. So from my experience, I like much better mentors. It's not really mentors, it's people in which you can share experiences and way of facing this. And I like sponsors. I do like sponsors that will challenge you, that will say, you want that position? Do you understand that these are the implications? Make your decisions. You do, I will support you. I am your sponsor. And it's even more stronger it's even more important when that sponsor is a man, I think. So I think it's important. My sponsor was my dad and my partners. I said that I have been very privileged. I should have mentioned not just my family, and I mentioned that. I have been very privileged from different perspectives. I have never feel that I was limited by someone or discriminated. And my partners, most of them at the beginning, now I have also women partners, but were men. When I was appointed CEO 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, most of the shareholders were men, and it was an unanimous decision. They said, you are the right person for this. I didn't have to make the case. My daughter, my youngest, was 6 or 7 when there was, 2 or 3 times that they did the voting, and I said, no, let's vote again, because probably whatever, and they would do the same thing. And I remember one of those partners told me in the first third round, said, the only reason why I'm questioning my decision, Blanca, is because you keep questioning us. You are the right person for this. And we're a global company, and they did support me. And so they were my sponsors. I believe they were my sponsor and took care of whatever was needed. They were very supportive when I said, I cannot go to this trip. I'll be there if whatever, I'm going to make a huge difference. But you have to understand that today I will not be able to travel. Let me tell you that I travel every week of the year for the past 20 years, every week. And but my family, my partners, have supported me, even our clients, I think. So I go more for sponsors and mentors. I would recommend that you make these groups in which you can not share difficulties, share way in which you have managed. I hate panels, groups that they probably meet just to share how horrible their life was. I want to hear, you can do this. Don't forget that you can do X, Y, Z. Those are the best mentors. And again, my daughters mentor me. Young girls that have joined the company mentor me. I have to be very open. I have to be very honest. I still need that support. We all need that support, right? We value that support.
Absolutely. We definitely hope that this conversation inspires many to be sponsors for women and their employees, and make sure that we can get these perspectives that, as you said, are so important. And we know that your story and your trajectory has been already an inspiration to so many women, not just in Mexico, but all over the globe. And we thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to move on to our panel now, but it was a pleasure to host you. And I would also like to thank my own sponsor on this call, who's been a partner in this endeavor, Andrew, for co-moderating this conversation with me. And I am looking forward to hearing what now our panel will have to say about the ways in which we can encourage the economic empowerment of women across different regions.
Sure.
Blanca, thank you so much again. We hope to continue working on these topics together, and just make sure that we empower women through these.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me. It was really an honor. I'm looking forward for the panel. I'm sure it's going to be an amazing panel, and I'm going to be here watching that. Again, it was an honor. I think we will have time later to keep on talking about this, and very honored. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Anya Prusa.
Thank you, Olivia, Andrew, and of course, Blanca. It was fascinating to hear what you were saying. And I think a lot of the themes, touching on the importance of support, right, in the family and outside of it, the need for representation and role models for women, and especially the fact that women should be able to choose a course without feeling guilt over, being mothers or wanting a career, right? All of these things I think we're going to delve into a bit more on the panel. So thanks to the three of you. Excellent conversation. So I would like to introduce our panelists for the second section of this event. And before I do so, I would just like to thank our partners at the Wilson Center, the Brazil Institute, the Mexico Institute, the Kennan Institute, our Middle East program, and our Latin America program for joining us today. Our speakers, and we have three incredible women who specialize in regions across the world, to discuss economic empowerment with us today. Our first speaker is Rebecca Tavares, and she is the CEO of the Brazil Foundation. She joined the Brazil Foundation in 2009 after over 10 years with the United Nations in Asia and Latin America. Our next panelist is going to be Lynn Munzer, and she is an expert in female entrepreneurship and empowerment, who has worked with nonprofits and a successful fintech startup in Beirut. And her current research focuses on how women in the Middle East and North Africa can overcome a lack of support and obtain access to the tools to build businesses and become entrepreneurs. And our third speaker is Sophia Azizian, and she's a partner and assurance leader for Central, East, and Southeastern Europe and Central Asia. It's a large portion of the world, at global accounting firm EY, where she also leads the Entrepreneurial Winning Women program. And she has done a lot of work on women's mentorship and leadership. So we're very glad to have all three of you with us. I would just like to kick it off by turning it over to Rebecca. And my question to you and to our other panelists is really a simple question, right? But one that I'm sure has a complicated answer. And it's, how do we create an environment that enables women's economic participation and growth? Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anya. It's really great to be with you today. And I want to also thank Olivia and Andrew and Blanca, especially because you really gave a human face to the topics that we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to probably be a little bit more or less interesting than Blanca was, because I do want to talk about the Brazil case and what the situation of Brazilian women in the pandemic. And then I do want to talk about how public policy and normative frameworks can take into account the needs for the environment for economic empowerment of women, as well as some advice for the private sector. So just to open up, because I'm working with the Brazil Foundation and very much involved in Brazil, I think Brazil is a mirror. It's one of the most affected countries in the world right now after the United States by the pandemic. So we see all of the classic symptoms that you described, Anya, in the opening of the panel. We've seen women's labor force participation has dropped to 1990 levels. It's 44% now. And women's unemployment now is double that of men in Brazil. The sectors that are most affected are the sectors that are occupied by women. Primarily the services sector, the domestic services, education, health, and commerce and sales in small businesses. So those are the businesses most affected by the pandemic, and the women are the ones in those businesses. And as both you and Blanca mentioned earlier today, the domestic responsibilities fall on women's shoulders. This is childcare. That's needed for children that are not in school, and including children's education. So many of the women dropping out of the labor force are having to drop out especially because of their responsibilities. And the other thing that we haven't touched on today is the incidence of violence against women, which has increased dramatically. Men losing their jobs, everyone being cooped up together in small spaces. The incidence of violence against women around the world has increased exponentially. And in Brazil today, a case of domestic violence is reported every 2 minutes. So I want to talk a little bit about how these factors that are influencing or affecting women with the pandemic mirror the rest of the world, but especially in the countries where the pandemic is most disruptive and women are most excluded. And of course, the women that come from backgrounds that are marginalized already, in the case of Brazil, Afro-Brazilian women, indigenous women, and rural women are most affected. And we know that our economies will not recover without women's economic recovery. So I'm going to be talking about the business case for investing in women, how the recovery of women's economic participation is essential for rebuilding our economies. McKinsey found that closing the gender gap in employment could increase per capita income in emerging economies by over 20% by 2030. That was a study that was done pre-pandemic. So we may not be able to get there because of the gender gap has widened, as we've said today earlier. We know that we have a lot further to travel than we did just a couple of years ago when it comes to women's economic empowerment and the gender gap in wages and labor force participation. But before I go to the business case, I also want to talk about the case that has to do with social justice, our values as Americans and as global citizens, and particularly the values that have been affirmed around the world by 153 countries in the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, as you all know, I'm sure the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed among the countries of the world as a map, a road map for economic and social development. And we have SDG 5, which really outlines the ways that women and gender equality, women's empowerment and gender equality can be reached. But we have a long way to go. And just finishing on Brazil here, I wanted to note that Brazil is ranked number 92 among 153 countries in gender equality. And this is especially disturbing because Brazil is an emerging economy. It's one of the emerging economies in the world. It's not a small, endangered economy. So there's no reason for this to be the case. But let me talk a little bit more about how we can invest in women and why. Women, and these are all things I'm sure our colleague from EY will be, well aware of this, because a lot of the studies and the researches that I'm going to cite come from EY, actually, that women are found to invest more in education, health, and social well-being, human capital formation of their family members and their community members. And so they bring the greatest return on the investment. Investing in women is investing in social capital formation. They create jobs at the local level. Those jobs are created by women's consumption. So as women's ability to consume grows, they create more jobs at their local level, and it strengthens the overall economy because it broadens the consumer base. There are more backwards and forward linkages into the local communities. And when we want to strengthen democratic institutions, and we want to strengthen participation, and we want to strengthen education, we work at the community level. And this is where Brazil Foundation also works. And that's where entrepreneurship thrives. So this is the investment that we should make in the communities, and women are the means to do that. So this is called the gender dividend. When we invest in women, the dividend is that we have economically empowered women who invest back in their local economies, and those economies prosper. Women are drivers of the economic growth. In most countries, 80% of consumer decisions are made by women, and that's a global figure. So when we invest in women leaders within business, both the management and the board, well, at all levels actually, but I'm talking about decision makers within business, those 80% of consumer choices are most well known by the women in decision-making positions. And so they can think of new markets, number one, markets that haven't been reached by all male boards and management. They can think about diversifying the products that are available because they know that market better, and they can reach further into new markets. So a couple of examples I wanted to bring up is in Unilever, Shakti Hindustan Unilever in India, hired rural Indian women as distributors, which reached deeply into the new rural markets. Again, this is women's leadership and management that instigated that. And of course, we're probably all familiar with the case of Avon saleswomen that went by canoe deeply into the Amazon to sell Avon products, and were incredibly successful. So we know that companies that have women majority boards are less volatile. They have longer sustained profitability. They're less disruptions, and the firms that have more women in leadership are growing faster. Again, this is according to EY, McKinsey, and the FMI. So we have a strong business case for investing in women as leaders, as entrepreneurs, and for advancing corporate culture to promote women. So what are the challenges to gender equality in the workplace? Number one, the double day. We've already discussed that. Women have to work all day and then come home and work at home. At least 60 to 75% of domestic work is still done by women, even when they're top executives. Two, lack of adequate childcare. Now, we can go into a full seminar on that, whether it should be provided publicly or privately or subsidized, but childcare is a barrier to women's full participation in the workforce. And then we have, of course, the difficult, really difficult social norms. And this involves attitudes, behaviors, beliefs. The types of roles that are associated with females are, unskilled, lowest paying, they're going to get pregnant, they don't need to work, and then they get also shunted off into those frontline services, which are now the most dangerous during the COVID-19 pandemic. So they're really in a very, very precarious situation. And then finally, equal pay, the glass ceiling. Women are still paid at best 80 cents on the dollar as a global average. And in Brazil, it's 53 cents on the dollar that women earn compared to men on the average. So I won't go into sexual harassment in the workplace because I think we're taking too much time, but I want to start on what are the solutions. We now know we have a business case for investing in women We have the legal and policy framework in the SDG development goals. And we also have many, many examples of legislation around the world that formalizes women's previously informal economic participation. You know, in Brazil, 42% of the economy is informal, but in India, the informal sector is a whopping 93% of the economy. And these people have no access to financial institutions. There are no social security protections, and you know what kind of disaster that means for economic growth and development and stability. So we can look at solutions. I would say number one solution for women, which is not necessarily a gendered policy, but making informal work formal, providing for those social security protections. In the case of Brazil, we had a constitutional amendment about 10 years ago that guarantees the labor rights to domestic workers that are already guaranteed to the other workers. And this was fought for by the women's movement, the Black movement, and organized labor. So we've also seen Brazil institute policies for maternity leave, paternity leave, a stronger ending violence against women law, which is really a landmark law around the world, and affirmative action for Black Brazilians in higher education, which is a huge step up for Black women. I want to go back to the paternity leave because this is one of my favorite topics that, you know, around the world, we meet men, and we all have men in our lives that wish that they could get away from their jobs to attend their children's games, you know, the football games or whatever, the dance performances that Blanca mentioned, to be there for the parent-teacher conferences, to be able to take care of their sick elderly parents. So these are the types of leaves, family leave, paternity leave being normalized is what you know, should come with paid maternity leave. And this is also a gender issue. This is about men's ability to change the roles that are associated with masculinity and open up a whole new range of opportunities for men to express themselves, and rather than in those very narrow gendered masculine norms. So I think Blanca has talked about the really key solutions that private sector can take right away. Number one, mentorships, sponsorships, and coaching. So we could spend a whole seminar on that, but that's number one. Creation of pipelines for women that show potential, and girls. So companies should set goals and targets for recruitment. And this is essential. You know, you have to have goalpost. And so we want to see the private sector and the leaders of the private sector. This is the other item that's really important to emphasize, is that the leadership has to come from the very top. We can't establish a women's or a gender department or unit or a diversity inclusion unit unless the very top CEO and the chair of the board are behind it, and they're holding everyone's feet to the fire for diversity inclusion with targets and indicators. Childcare, I've already mentioned. And the last one is the need to look more closely at the benefits that are provided to parents and families so that they can share more equitably their domestic and family responsibilities. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Anya.
Thank you, Rebecca. I wonder if we could go to Sophia next. I know she's traveling en route.
Yes, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I never have a dull moment with my job. So I do apologize for being in a taxi. I'm not the driver, so all safety is observed. I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. I'm part of the EY Global Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and so I'm very passionate about this topic. And in addition, I look after the Entrepreneurial Winning Women program, which we do in Russia. We actually do it in some other parts and started with the US, Australia, Japan, and now it's expanded. So in EMEA, our region, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, we actually were the first to start it in Russia. And you know, you've probably seen a lot of press recently on the domestic violence that's happening in Russia, which has been exaggerated by COVID. So I'm very passionate about this topic. And as Rebecca mentioned, EY also does a lot of research. I think a lot has been said, and my personal view is I don't want to repeat those topics. I could listen forever to Blanca and Rebecca and Lena, I'm sure, said a lot of important whys and hows. My personal observation is that we probably over mentor women a little bit and almost over handle them, but they're not the problem. If you look at the university graduates, they're mostly women. If we look at the entry levels in big corporations, there are a lot of women. In fact, my personal opinion is they are actually better prepared when they come for interviews. And as also was mentioned before, we actually did some studies on women entrepreneurs, and we see that the pay on loans is much higher with the women. In Africa, we did a research on Kiwi, the micromanagement company, and the return on loans, there were small loans, sometimes $20 or less, but it was 99.9% higher than ever. And that's also what I see in Russia. A lot of women entrepreneurs are very diligent, and they actually are very smart, and they get into technology, and they do really well in business. So my point would be that it's the sponsorship of people who make decisions. That's what needed now, and the accountability for those CEOs, for people in the government, for people in the society. I think we need to bring more men to these discussions, because sometimes I feel at conferences it's women talking with each other, at each other, about each other, which is important as well. I support a lot of female communities and different associations. It's good for sharing your success stories and sometimes your failure stories. But I think for us to make a bigger progress, we really need to bring more men on board and for them to be vocal. So when the CEO, the existing CEO of EY, he's actually been leading the Global Diversity Committee. When he became vocal, it's now the recent trend to support women and LGBT plus, etc. But I think you really can't get away with sometimes doing that, getting some men on board for them to actually make the big breakthrough. Quite often, women are not at the table when decisions are made, so they can't even say anything, and they can't be part of the decision making. And interestingly enough, a lot of consumers and a lot of customer decisions are made by women, and yet there were not enough women in some even big companies which make products which are consumed mostly by women. So I think in probably more developed countries, there's more discussion on this. I think the domestic unpaid care is a big issue. But I would say that even in some developed countries like Germany and Netherlands, there's still a way to go. I think women are not as empowered as they probably could be. Again, it's the social norm. So you have all the rights, but then if it's a social norm that a woman is the one who takes care of the children, if it's the woman who goes to the kindergarten and picks the child at 12 p.m., it's not possible to combine a career with this kind of timetable and the paternity leaves, etc. I mean, they could be there, but if men don't take them, or it's looked down when they take them, and they also have some career consequences, then nobody would take them. So you almost need to have those cases and showcase what would be like for men to take paternity leaves and come back and have a career, or for a woman to have a career, have children, or not have children, whatever, but to actually show all possible scenarios. And I think I would probably end with the phrase, one of the entrepreneurial winning women, she was a finalist and she's an owner of a big chain of restaurants. In one of these discussions we had, she said, I sometimes feel that every working woman also needs a wife because you need to come home to a nice dinner and somebody to actually feel sorry for you. But we all need that support. So sometimes women associations could be that, but also just the understanding from men how it's not easy to do it all. And I think with that, I will give you the floor back to Anya. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, and thanks for making the time to join us in the middle of your busy day or busy night. I want to turn next to Lynn, who really focuses on these questions in her research. You know, how do you create the tools, right? How do you get women to think that they can be entrepreneurs and then give them the tools to actually succeed? Lynn?
Thank you, Anya. I would want to start by saying it's apparently the situation is similar everywhere. I was listening to Rebecca. It's the same situation in the Middle East as in Brazil. Let me start by saying that countries in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, are distinctive and have their unique norms and laws. So I'm going to be careful not to overgeneralize. That said, I'm going to start with the positive. The current situation of working women and women entrepreneur in the region is improving, surprisingly. Women are breaking through the rigid gender norms, notably by taking advantage of the digital transformation, as we just mentioned. For example, 1 in 3 startups in the region are founded or led by women, which is technically a higher rate than in Silicon Valley. That said, the overall situation of women economic participation and entrepreneurship in the region is still significantly worse than other regions. According to the WEF Gender Gap Index 2020, it measures the equality based on the gaps between women and men in health, education, economy, and politics. MENA has the lowest score of any region. 7 out of 10 countries with the largest gender gap are in the region, including Iraq and Yemen, which goes dead last among the 153 countries. So despite the impressive gains in women's education and attainment, as well as the rapid decline in fertility, the share of women in the workforce remains the lowest globally. Female unemployment in the Middle East and North Africa is 3 times higher in the region than any other region. And twice as many women are unemployed compared to men, where 62% of them work in the informal sector. So we see the existing laws and the conservative social norms, they create an unequal playing field for women. On top of that, we have the pay gap, we have the unequal allocation of unpaid care that's go on women, the lack of affordable care already mentioned. Like they further contribute to women's low economic participation. For example, in the region, women earn on average 78.9% less than men on a per capita basis. As for women entrepreneurship, the overall rate of female activity is still the lowest worldwide, with 9% only. Female entrepreneurs, they face legal, financial, cultural, and knowledge barriers. They tend to have difficulty getting loans due to discriminatory inheritance laws. So gender stereotype and biases, they're deeply entrenched. To top it all off, the pandemic has made things even tougher for women workers and entrepreneurs. For one thing, the pandemic, as any other region, it had aggravated the existing restrictive social norms that reinforce the traditional family roles. And it highlighted how the discriminatory legal framework continue to deny women equal access to economic opportunity. That disproportionately affected women more than men. For example, the UN Women estimates that 700,000 women have lost their job in the region. On the good side, the pandemic has helped some women entrepreneurs. For example, during my talk with women in Yemen, the growing male unemployment rate has incentivized them to start home-based businesses to support their family. It's something they couldn't do that before due to cultural restrictions. So the question is, why does it all matter? Why is it important to have a strong enabling environment for women economic participation and entrepreneurship? It's clear that all MENA countries will benefit from increased women economic participation and activity, especially that the region is losing around $575 billion a year due to the existing gender-based discrimination in laws and practices, which is limiting women's rights and economic participation. Working women contribute significantly to the growth of the national economies, I've already mentioned by Rebecca. So increasing labor force participations to the level of men could boost the Middle East GDP by estimated like 47%. Furthermore, it has a tremendous impact on the dividend for society, already mentioned by Rebecca. For example, when women have paid work, they invest 90% of their earnings back into their families, compared to only 30% by men. So creating an enabling environment is key to women's economic empowerment. Now, I'm gonna talk about what government can do. I'm gonna talk on 4 pillars. First, we have to collect data and build women capacity. The region data on anything related to female, not just economic participation, is outdated. Some countries have no data. Without data, government cannot make informed decisions and they cannot even measure success. Governments in the region should also focus heavily on capacity building for women workers and entrepreneurs. They should provide skill training, create gender awareness campaign, and push towards women leadership development through mentorship, sponsorship, and so on. I would say they should answer the question, how do we lower barriers to entry for women? Second, we have to increase access to financing. I know it's a global problem, but women entrepreneurs in the region, especially through my research, they are ready. They are able to receive funds. However, banks and financial institutes, they exert indirect discrimination, especially that women in the region, they don't have collaterals due to laws, discriminatory inheritance laws. So funders and policymakers should look closely at women's access to funds and create programs and initiatives that tackle the barriers. Third, reform discriminatory laws and regulation. The laws differ around the region, but they have the similar bent, which diminishes the value of women in business. Laws they violate and hinder women's right to participate in the workforce should be reformed and replaced with ones that recognize and respect the rights of women economic participation. Finally, we have to change the cultural narrative around women in the region. Changing the culture is a continuing project, but it's essential for the long-term success of the region. We need to change the tone and the way women see themselves, not just the society, how the society sees them. It's the way we see each other. The culture has created this mindset of women being less capable of a man, and women are breaking that. We should highlight more positive role models. We should provide more mentorship. We should provide more, the media should be involved in this as well. Finally, today, the region witnesses a lot of new policies and programs focused on empowering women, but it's time to get real about it and create positive, lasting change. Thank you, Anya.
Thank you, Lynn. I am struck, after listening to all of these comments by how similar a lot of the themes are, right? Even going back to what Blanca said initially, right, that there's this need for, accountability and support, at the top of companies in the boardrooms to make sure that women's voices are being heard, the access to financing, access to childcare, access to education, all of these things seem common around the world. And I am interested, in kicking off the Q&A. And for those of you who are watching us, if you have questions, you can send them to mexico@wilsoncenter.org. That's mexico@wilsoncenter.org. And we'll send them to our panelists. But just to start this discussion, I'd like to focus on kind of, what do you see as are there different challenges, I guess is the question, between women who are maybe in the informal economy, facing, challenges of poverty, for example, and then women who are, on a professional track, right, working for a company, working their way up. On the surface, there would seem to be, vast differences between these two types of economic engagement. But are there policies that we can, put out there that would help both, or do we need to consider these actually as two different tracks when we're doing public policy responses? Rebecca, I see you nodding. Do you want to go first?
Well, thank you, Anya. You know, this is something of deep concern to me, and not to many. You know, much of the women's movement is the informality in which most women work around the world, and agricultural workers, all kinds of manual laborers, small commerces, small production, the entire domestic labor force in most, I would say, countries, I would venture to say, and they are this huge sector of the world economy is not recognized as having the same rights as other workers. And this has, you know, and this is even among some of the most labor favorable countries. And I'll mention India as an example. You know, actually, India has passed a law called the right to work. They recognize the right to work as a constitutional right, and yet they're not really able to provide the same protections as legal workers to this vast army, billions of people that are, no, I shouldn't say billions because the population is 1.3 billion, but millions, hundreds of millions of people that have no protections at all. So they work long hours, they're exposed to very unhealthy and dangerous situations. They have to reclaim their rights. If they're stiffed by an employer, they have no legal recourse to that. Young people are exploited. Girls are exploited sexually as well as laborers, and the types of alternatives that this huge sector of the world population can see are very limited. And so I think that's where we really need to focus our attention, because this is a productive sector. These are very productive people, oftentimes creative. I think we can all give examples of cases that we know where there's been just such a problem that was solved by someone who was working in this sector. And we're, you know, but the formal legal system, and the international framework, while we recognize this issue, we're not doing enough to formalize their rights and protections as workers and as citizens. On the other hand, we have the more empowered people that are in the formal sector that may be on an upward trajectory and encountering that glass ceiling, or feeling the microaggressions, or experiencing discrimination and gender-based discrimination, or gender and racial discrimination at the same time. Those individuals do have access. They have recourse to laws, to systems and procedures within the sector of their company, and it's not pleasant, and it's not easy. And I don't want to in any way minimize the suffering of people who are on that track, because most of us that are probably listening today are experiencing that trajectory and have had our own experiences with discrimination. But the really game-changing population is the population that's working informally, that's contributing. I don't have a global figure for what the contribution to the world, the gross product of the world, I don't know, but I would venture to say probably informal sector workers are upwards of 75% of the global economy. And so, we really have to pay attention here, and it's along with the issue of children, because as long as childcare is seen as the province of one gender and one set of gender roles, that will hinder and limit the ability of 50% of the world population to fully contribute to economic growth and stability. And it is a stability issue. This is an issue for democracy and building strong institutions. We can't have the stability and the democracy that we're seeking with so many people marginalized with no legal recourse to when they are discriminated against or they're locked out of the opportunities that are available in the society.
And Sophia, you had mentioned specifically in your presentation microfinance, right? And the fact that women are actually much better at issuing returns. And obviously a lot of the women who engage in microfinance are in the informal sector, correct?
Yes, that's right. And I would also like to echo what Rebecca's saying. This is the observation and the recent research in Russia and the countries of CIS, in fact, that women are getting poorer, and it's mostly the self-employed small business, sometimes mid-sized business, but mostly small business that is suffering. And quite often, if there is discussion about layoffs, it's mostly women that are laid off. And they are perceived to be easier to lay off because they are not the ones to take up the, the discussion. Sometimes they're weaker at negotiations. Sometimes they might not have taken good care of signing proper contracts, or in fact, if they don't have, if they don't receive the income legally, which is what happens when you are already in the discriminating part of the society. It could only get worse for you. And that's why we do have a lot of NGOs and lawyers who do pro bono work, because now we see that the life of the poor gets sometimes even worse. And I also see, and that also happens in the corporate world, I have to say. I also see this also discriminating type of discussion. Well, this is always a guy who needs to support the family. So if a woman is married for some reason, she's perceived to be easier to lay off because she has a husband who will look after her. And I find this type of discussions absolutely inappropriate, but they do happen. We have to admit that that's the case. And I think, of course, the pandemic and the economic downturn only makes the situation for women worse. But also the observation is, and that also happened in the 90s with the fallout of the Soviet Union, is that it's mostly women that picked up the pieces when men fell apart and started drinking or taking drugs or couldn't handle what was happening in the country. It was women who were responsible for their children, for the society, for themselves, for the elderly parents, that started building up businesses. Some of them were small, but they were the ones who actually were the strongest of the weaker sex, which we normally refer to women, but I totally don't agree with. So yes, you're right. It's the not officially employed women that are probably more at risk, even though I would say that the pain of women who are discriminated in any capacity is as real as it could be. So back to you.
Lynn, I saw you nodding to a lot of what Sophia was saying.
Yeah, I've in the past few years, I've been talking to a lot of women in the Middle East and North Africa, especially now with the pandemic. It's more obvious, and they mention it loud and clear. They said, I already mentioned it, that because men couldn't handle and couldn't go around unemployment, the woman had to take charge. Women were able to just to lift their family up. They were determined, like, we're not taking our family down. I will start baking at home and selling my whatever I do. I'll start a salon at home. You'll see them in small, they take one of the rooms and turn it into a hairdressing salon just to lift the family. So yeah, a lot of these women do not count. I rely on data. So we don't see them in data. We don't see what they're giving to the economy. We don't see that how their impact, how they're changing the society. And this is what Sophia, you're mentioning. And that's why I believe, like, we need to give power to these women in order for them to really exist. Cultural changes should exist in order for them to give them voices, not just to exist in time of necessity, just also to take advantage of what's going on, and also to grow as whether business owners, whether employees, to have, whether as women. And they're already taking charge in the Middle East, I would say that.
I think it's obviously clear, right, that we want to empower women, but part of that has to be raising awareness among men. All of you have mentioned this. So how do we do that, right? How do we get these conversations to not be conversations just among women, conversations that happen on International Women's Day, but more holistic conversations that are part of every policy discussion. When we're talking about unemployment, or when we're talking about education policy or defense policy, right? That women are at the table and contributing. How do we make sure that women's voices are being valued, especially in the economic space? Rebecca?
Hi, thank you, Anya. And before I go to that question, I just wanted to correct the ILO in 2018 said that 60% of the world's working population is in the informal economy, but they represent only 15% of the global economy. So it's masses of people, very small percentage of the economy. You have brought up some of the other issues that are related not just to women's economic empowerment and economic participation, which, I feel we have a strong business case and we appeal to the bottom line. When we want to get men engaged in this dialogue, we have to also talk about what's in it for them, and what's in it for all of us, and what's in it for their children. And that's the fact that actually women's economic participation it represents growth for everybody. And that's why it's important. And again, we have all the social justice and the values arguments to make, but we do need to make very clear arguments. So in the case of women, peace and security, we have more and more women participating in mediation, negotiations of peace agreements, be seated at the table. And we have evidence that, and this is UN Women's evidence, but there are others, also academic studies, that when women participate, they have a seat at the table in the negotiation of peace accords, those peace accords last longer, they're more likely to be enforced by the parties. So that's another, women need to be at the table in all of our sectors. We need leadership and political positions, not just as role models for young people, because women in positions of leadership may have a different way of looking at the same questions and problems. It's not necessarily that there's a feminine perspective, but oftentimes, especially if you have more than one, I think the rule of thumb is at least 3 women in a boardroom or in a high-level decision-making environment, can actually, create much more diversity of thinking, wider-ranging alternatives and options that are considered. So in political leadership, in geopolitical negotiations, conflict resolution, and in the workplace, investing in women's empowerment, it makes sense, because the solutions and the results are more durable.
Thank you.
Back to you.
And I just really quick want to thank Sophia for joining us. She has to run to catch her flight. So she's going to be dropping off, but we really appreciated her insight while she was with us.
Thank you so much. And I am sorry I need to drop off. Really, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I enjoyed listening to the other speakers, but yes, I need to go through security, so I'll have to switch off. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
So I really, I think we got a question from our audience, which was about education. And we got another question from the audience, which also, I think, touched on one of the other issues that we hear about with women in business, which is corruption. So I'd like to just throw those two out there. How do we make sure that women get the education they need, especially if they're in more rural areas? And then, does corruption impact women's ability to do business? And does it impact them in ways that are different than the way it impacts men? Lynn or Rebecca?
Yeah, I can. I will start with corruption. That was one of the, in my research, I interviewed 200 women in the Middle East and North Africa, women entrepreneurs. And I was asking them, what are the challenges the major challenges you faced with your business, and a lot of them mentioned corruption. So this said, I think some of the countries in the Middle East are shifting right now by going virtual. We're having where they can register, making it easy for people to become business owners. But before that, still in most of the region, when women go to register for their businesses, for example, they have to face a lot of problems. First, they ask them to have male partners, or else they won't take them serious. Second, they have to give a lot of briberies because they're not taken serious. It's that simple. They don't take them serious, so they ask them for money to register their business. Third, their file is always in the bottom, never on top. So how do we have to talk about this, and we really don't talk about this openly. We have to talk about corruption. We have to present corruption and how badly it's impacting the society and the economy, which is businesses. They're not registering, or they're not going into business because of such limitations. As for education, it is now with the pandemic and everything going virtual, it's getting even more difficult to increase women economic education participation. In the Middle East, we have more women with university degrees than men. Yet this is gonna go down it is going down with the pandemic, because women are asked to support their family, to help their mothers in the house, to be the caregiver, to abide to these traditional roles. And especially in the rural areas, they're limiting them from, like, the laptop is used by the man, not the woman. So the boy is gonna go to school first, do his education. He have the preference because, mentioned before, he's gonna be the breadwinner, and woman is gonna be the home, the housewife eventually. So what we can do about this is create the awareness of and the importance, and provide the required technology in rural area, provide more iPads or phones or laptops, anything to include both girls and boys and keep them in the education system. Thank you, Anya.
And Rebecca, I know corruption is obviously a huge issue in Brazil as well.
Yes, it is. I think actually that I'm not sure I have a lot more to say about that, except that I want to make the case that women are not necessarily less corrupt than men. Oftentimes an argument for women in politics is made that they're less corrupt than men, and we try to move away from any naturalization of female qualities, and I'm afraid that women do participate around the world in corruption, although the barriers are higher for women. And so, as we just heard, if you want to start a business, for example, much more difficult to get that first loan and to build up the trust among the investors that might be working to help you. And the same is true for corruption. I think, that with the barriers for, the payoffs that are required, and I can't speak to that for small businesses in Brazil because I don't have the firsthand knowledge of that, but I do know that it's a big issue. And I can talk about Afghanistan, where I served in 2017, and how prevalent corruption was. And I can even tell a story. This is less about women's entry into business, but it shows a lot about the value of women in Afghani society. And this was a story that was told to me about by a man who was a colleague of mine at the United Nations, who had a situation where his cousin was arrested for being in public with a girl. So the cousin was, I think they were both around 17, 18 years old, and they weren't, this was a crime to be kissing. They were kissing in public. They were thrown into jail. And this colleague of mine from the UN was brought in to try to get these two young people out of jail. And so, he was given very specific instructions He called the judge. The judge said, you know, you need to go to into this business and you have to give this amount of money. And so when he got there, the amount of money to get the cousin, the male cousin, was somewhere in the range of $1,000. I don't remember exactly the numbers that he had to pay. And then the person that was negotiating with him said, "And do you want the girl?" And he said, "Yes, I want the girl." And he says, "Well, you have her for $400, you know." So her value was so low. And if she had not been, you know, taken through corruption, if she hadn't been paid for, she would have languished forever, probably, and been, you know, sexually abused in the system, the jail system. But then, you know, the judge then immediately released these two young people, and they all went back around to their daily lives. So, you know, corruption affects women. I think the original question was, how does corruption affect women? And it affects women in, you know, in multiple ways. But I don't want to, you know, for any of us to believe that women are immune from some of the moral failures that men are as well. And so just on the question of education, very quickly, and I'm sure the audience knows this, that the higher level of education in any country in the world, with every additional year of education, the economic indicators go up for that country. So the average education numbers yield financial benefits for the country. So investing in education is really the #1 development indicator, and investing in girls' education not only contributes to their own contribution to and participation in the labor force and in the economy, but it also is directly correlated with their ability to space their families, the children in their families. They have much more control over their own fertility with every additional year of education. And that, of course, is directly related to national economic development as well. So those are just two factors that are really important, and education has to be our highest priority.
Thank you. I know we have just a couple minutes left. I wonder, Lynn, Rebecca, if you have, you know, 30 seconds, 60 seconds of final remarks you would like to share. You know, what do you think we should focus on, right? What's the most important thing for female entrepreneurship and economic empowerment?
Well, at the moment, we'll say, like, I'll give some credit, the Middle East and North Africa region, they're recognizing the need to, well, first diversify away from oil, and they're looking to engage more women. But they don't understand for real, like, we need to tackle, like, enabling women economic empowerment, hold the key to our success. It's the world's most promising untapped area of investment that we should tackle. So unless we include gender equality in every, after COVID, which is pushing women away from their jobs, the situation will not change. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Rebecca, 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds. Just, you know, running through the topics: education, #1. Making the informal formal, #2. Those are both basic human rights. So human rights to education, human right to work, a decent work that's legally registered and you know, subject to all of the norms and responsibilities that the private sector and the public sector owe. And then finally, financial services for women entrepreneurs and young women who have a business idea. So even banking the unbanked, access to financial services, those are essential also for women that have the potential to grow and right now are being held back. So
thank you. Thank you, Rebecca Tavares, Lynn Moenzer. A special thanks to Blanca Trevino for joining us today. And to my colleagues, Olivia Soledad and Andrew Rudman. It's been a real pleasure to host this conversation. I hope it's been as equally interesting to our audience as it has been to me. I have learned an incredible deal from you today. So thank you so much for joining us. And to those of you who are watching, you can see more of our work and sign up to receive future event invites at wilsoncenter.org/gender. We hope to see you all back again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, Julia.
Nice to meet you.